Please subscribe the channel and hit the like button. When they first began to fail in Zaporozhye, the AFU shifted tactics and sent reinforcements to the Bakhmut line to see if they could make a breakthrough there instead. At this point, with time running out, they'll take their chips where they may, and if they can make a significant showy breakthrough in Bakhmut, it can at least salvage some part of their campaign enough to use as a credit with NATO in the upcoming summit. And they have been making some gains in Bakhmut, but the critical point that's missed is the scale to which they're expending troops there. New information points to the fact that they're throwing very large amounts of reinforcements there the past few days, thousands of men and what's described by a frontline observer as hundreds of new vehicles. All in an attempt to capture Klescheevka in the south of Bakhmut and make inroads around Berkhovka in the north. The past few days have seen reports that AFU had captured it, but now it's been confirmed by video that Russian troops not only still hold Klescheevka but have pushed the AFU a good distance back, about 500 m away from the line. But due to the absolute desperation of the AFU to make some kind of inroad somewhere, the fighting has been particularly intense and bloody for both sides. Reports on the casualties go as follows. In the Bakhmut direction, our guys have regained previously lost positions. At great cost, but the UAF suffered even greater losses and retreated. 2 of the 3 dominant heights are controlled by the Russian army. In other directions, bloody battles are going on without the success of the UAF. Sanitary losses per day are up to 1,000 people from the UAF, ours, up to 200 to 250. There are numerous videos from both sides in that direction, showing the deceased of the other side. The AFU captures a few troops here and there as they continue aggressively storming the positions. One thing to comment on, many are using the Bakhmut area as evidence that Wagner troops were superior to Russian forces, basically repeating the cliché that Russian troops are retreating from the areas that Wagner had captured and held. The main thing to note on that is that so far, Russian forces have only retreated from the zones already long established to be crumple zones or buffer areas that were meant specifically for this purpose. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's good to explain a little better what exactly the definition of a crumple zone is. In short, it is an area that's typically in front of a heavily fortified place which has a natural geographic/topological advantage. In combat strategy, arguably the most important thing is the geography, whether it's advantageous or not, etc. So for instance, you may have an area with a high ground which is very naturally defensible, and below that area is nothing but flat open ground with no natural cover, that is very difficult to defend even if you build trenches into it. To create a crumple/buffer zone, you would capture this flat area and hold it only as a forward expanse in order to give your troops room to pull back and slowly lead the enemy in through the enfilade of your defending units, which will be holed up in much better cover, and shooting artillery from the elevated positions. I wrote many months ago how the entire northwest sector of Bakhmut, everything past Berkhovka, was taken specifically for the purpose of creating a crumple zone, as an example. Now here you can see roughly what was taken from the peak of Russian control around Bakhmut to almost present. But the area to the east, just behind Klescheevka, is a big high ground that Russia is holding and is well fortified. The other important thing is that the troops operating in these areas are not the strongest of the Russian armed forces. There are some decent units like the 144th Guards Motor Rifle Division elements, 200th Guards Motor Rifle from the 14th Army Corps in Berkhovka, as well as some VDV on the flanks, 83rd and 31st Guards Airborne Assault, but also a lot of 3rd Army Corps units like the 72nd, which are the newly created volunteer organizations and are not high up on the totem pole. As to why Russia may be shortchanging what you might think is a significant area, the simple answer is that there are other areas which have precedence over it. Namely, the Kremenaya-Svatovo line has what is probably the more elite and higher quality of the Russian army, as it's swarming with various VDV units and Russia's best 1st Guards tank army. And of course, the southern Zaporozhye direction, as well as the adjacent Kherson area, which has most of Russia's currently best deployed units, from the 58th Army, most of the best Spetsnaz brigades, etc. So that is all to say that the Crimea and Zaporozhye area is prioritized by Russian command. In Zaporozhye the reason is obvious, because Ukraine is building its largest offensive potential there in general. In Crimea the reason is likely because Russia sees the best opportunity for developing its own initiative and offensive potential, and likely sees the Kharkov vector as being critical in importance to recapture sometime in the near future. Thus, Bakhmut is left with some of the leftovers which are told to make do the best they can. They're not pushovers, mind you, like I said there are some decent units there, but they are simply now being outnumbered by the sheer amount of new reinforcements that Ukraine is pouring into the area. Also, Ukraine continues to use a few very elite smaller battalions like the Jaeger troops in the actual shock assault role against specially chosen weak points where Russian reservists are sitting in trenches. With that said, they are still clearly holding the most important points if you discount some of the open fields of the crumple zones, so for now the situation is not critical despite some alarmists claiming that Bakhmut will soon fall back to AFU control after being encircled. And as of this writing, Russia appears to have counterattacked to regain ground as well. The 105th Regiment of the DPR militia TG channel reports on the Russian counterattack on the southern flank of the Artyomovsk front. The Artyomovsk direction is a source of good news today. In the morning reports came in that the Russian army is launching a powerful counterattack on the southern flank. 1. From the Klescheevka area, the Russian forces launched an offensive in the direction of Krasnoy. 2. From the Kurtyamovka area, an offensive is underway in the direction of Belaya Gora. Our infantry is actively supported by aviation and heavy artillery, as usual, thank God. So the conclusion is, Ukraine is expending a lot of forces and offensive potential, in both materiel, manpower, ammo, etc., to capture a few empty fields thus far. Now, to the north, the situation is the reverse. Russian elite units are overrunning Ukrainian weak points and are making daily gains. Today Russia recaptured the industrial area of Berkhovka, the town just to the east of the Seversk front. The town itself is still held by the AFU, but Russian units are now encroaching on it. And further north is where Russia is having the most success by far, on the Crimea line. There are daily small gains here, including today's capture of the rail line in Novoslavsky, near Kuzmovka. There are also some gains south near Makivka. Svidov sector of the front and fighting near Novoslavsky. Situation at the end of July 6, 2023. At the Svidov sector, Russian units continue to assault the positions of the AFU in the Novoslavsky area. After establishing control over the depot, the Russian armed forces entrenched themselves on 2nd Street and shifted their efforts to the surrounding area. Soldiers of the Russian armed forces stormed strongholds south of the village. As a result of the fighting, Russian servicemen occupied several forest belts near the railway, including to the west of the railway line. Now the assault detachments of the Russian armed forces are trying to advance to the landing adjacent to Novoslavsky. Behind it is an important height of 190 meters, which makes traffic from the south difficult. In general, it can be seen that particularly in the south direction in this zone, Russian forces are slowly advancing towards Torsk/Torsko, which itself is not far away from Lyman. Slowly but surely Russia is inching back towards Lyman and eventually Slavyansk and the Izium direction. Here you can see some of the recent results in this direction. Below are elements of Russian VDV capturing AFU trenches in that direction. You can see a few AFU surrender at the end. Now, to take it back to Zaporozhye for a moment, let's see what's coming next. We know that Zelensky really wanted something to show for the NATO summit coming up in a few days on July 12. This is why it appeared a new offensive wave was imminent, and the AFU's 128th Mountain Assault Brigade did launch some attempts yesterday, but they were not as massive as the originals. SOS button, SOS button, SOS button. The enemy continues to attack on the left flank of Zaporozhye, already 5 waves of meat rush under fire in the attack. Black small square. The operational situation in the Vasilyevsky district in the Kamensky direction at 1900 hours. Southern Military District 58th Army 19th Division Defense Zone. The day after the infantry artillery preparation, the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade sends waves of infantry to attack from Pyatakhotka towards Dzerbyansky. The first 4 waves were partially blown up by mines, partially destroyed and scattered by artillery fire and our fighters. The surviving armed forces each time fled to the outskirts of Pyatakhotka. Now the biggest wave is coming. Up to 200 militants of the 128th Guards Brigade are again walking like zombies under fire without armored vehicles. In the morning, enemy attacks are repulsed by 429 infantry regiments, Pseudoplatov's detachment, and artillery. During the battles, the enemy suffers heavy losses, but still throw infantry into battle. The battles continue. SOS button, SOS button, SOS button. However, there's some word they are gearing up for another big one right on the eve of the summit. Based on the results of the analysis of all incoming data, he concentrated up to 40 battalions in the Orekhovo-Polotsk direction, aiming to rush along the Orekhov-Tokmak vector. Understanding our ability to launch missile and bomb attacks on clusters, it is likely that he will continue the tactics of a creeping offensive with limited forces, until he understands that favorable conditions have been created for the introduction of the main reserves intended for the subsequent throw deep into our territories. It is possible that a simultaneous strike attempt will be made in the direction of Energodar in order to capture the Zaporozhye NPP. Here we should expect the most unpleasant surprises. The Kakhov Reservoir is a witness to that. And here's Rybar's write-up with their intel. The enemy is preparing to throw large forces into a new wave of offensive before the NATO summit on July 11th to 12th. Maybe tonight or next. Black small square. According to the latest data, Black small square. Kiev urgently needs to show some noticeable results on the battlefield to report to the West. For a month, special achievements of the armed forces of Ukraine could not be achieved. Black small square. In recent weeks, the enemy has been pulling up reserves, units that did not take part in the first stage of the offensive, which must be thrown in several directions of impact, including the offensive guard. Black small square. At night, the armed forces of Ukraine secretly transferred equipment in small groups, and not in noticeable columns, concentrating closer to the front. Black small square. Enemy attacks for almost 2 weeks with almost no armored vehicles or with a minimum number. Probably the equipment is being saved for an attempt to break through the front. There's new indication that they are attempting to concentrate forces for an attempt across the reservoir, but Russian preemptive air strikes are continually hampering their preparations and setting them back.